program. This is the first of a series of hopefully will be successful programs. We have a very interesting topic today. We have JohnCannan of
I've been in Maryland. I've been in Montgomery County.
Yes.
I practiced here in Maryland in Baltimore City. So now I'm at Drexel University.
Drexel.
And I was a whole lot of Congress too.
So he's going to be talking about legislative history, and I was a Washington librarian for 30 years, and so I did a lot of legislative history. And I talked to him, he said, no, that's wrong. And I said, well, you do this. No, that's wrong. That's not how you do it now. So I'm very curious to see what he says about how you do legislative history. And I want to thank is Joe here? Joe's not here. But for allowing us to have it here at the bar. Thanks.
Great. It's nice to be back in Baltimore City. From the great city of Philadelphia. Traffic is hard, just so you know. But anyway, here I go. Okay, so I was at the Law Library of Congress when healthcare was being passed, and I thought, wow, well, I'll just do a legislative history of the healthcare bill, and that's going to be real easy because it just all happened, and I'll be able to pick everything, I'll be able to put everything together, and 2 years later, I finally finished. And the reason it took so long is because I realized that Congress is doing a lot of things differently. It's using old procedures in new ways, and new procedures in different ways. And whenever it changes these procedures, it affects the legislative history that generates the bill. And I thought, well, maybe that's just healthcare. But actually, it turned out to be everything. It's just the way that Congress operates now. So the way that we used to do legislative history is not necessarily completely wrong, but we have to know about the new ways that Congress does procedures because that really affects the history that we get from the bill. To show you that, I'm going to be talking about the Affordable Care Act. Now, and that brings my first question. Just to show you how different the legislative history is for healthcare, what's the name of the healthcare bill? Is it the Affordable Care Act? Does anyone want to take a guess? Yes.
PACA.
And that stands for?
Affordable Care Act.
Right, almost.
And it's also
Yes.
The Affordable Care Act because it came from
Right, 2 seconds. Absolutely right. It's not one bill, it's two. And actually, let me see if I can't read these things. It's the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, amended by the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010. So imagine putting that into a cite suit. That's a pretty long cite. Now, this is whenever they introduced the healthcare bill in the Senate when they were debating it. This is how they would introduce it. They would say something like this: motion to proceed to H.R. 3590 to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to modify the first-time homebuyer's credit in the case of members of the armed forces and certain other federal employees, and for other purposes. Where's healthcare in there? I guess is it other purposes? I don't know. I'll get there. Anyway, so I'm going to answer why these things turned out the way they are. I'm going to talk briefly about legislative history as we know it. I'm going to talk about the new congressional procedures that are affecting that history, and then I should talk about how they affected the passage of healthcare. Now, just as a warning to you, I'm going to be talking about how the Democrats used these procedures back when they ran to Congress in 2010, but rest assured, Republicans are doing the same thing right now, probably at this very minute. So it's just that the way both parties use these procedures not on. Now, what is legislative history? It's sort of almost an existential question. If you read Black's dictionary, it is the background events leading to the enactment of a statute. Legislative history is sometimes recorded so that it can later be used in interpreting a statute. That's the Black's dictionary definition. The important word there that we should all know about, especially when we move on to healthcare, is that sometimes, not everything is recorded. And as we'll see, a lot of stuff that used to be recorded isn't being recorded anymore. The sources of legislative history, I think we can all read those off. Who wants to guess? What's the biggest sources of legislative history? And I know your names, so I can put you guys down. Don't make me embarrass anybody. Sir? Yes, exactly. Committee reports. Any others?
Debate.
Yes, debate. Hearings, all that. Yeah, all that kind of fun stuff. We know all that, okay? And what would we turn to if we wanted to know the legislative history? What's the most important, probably, tool for teaching legislative history today. To be honest. But no, students around talking about like actual. If you had to teach anyone about legislative history, what would you do? No, you wouldn't even go to Thomas. You go to YouTube. What would you pull up? Yes, Sue McCarty, say it out loud. Say it loud, say it proud. Exactly. You would go to Schoolhouse Rock and you would pull up. Because the procedure is so simple that you can just roll out a 3-minute cartoon. And I told this Europeans not too long ago. They were both intrigued and appalled that this is how people learn how the legislature works in this country. Because if you look at it, the procedure, introduce bill, goes to committee, goes to the floor, goes to the Senate, goes to the conference, all that kind of stuff. It's this seamless procedure that we all sort of expect and know how it works and so forth. But the only problem is it doesn't work that way nowadays. I mean, if you look at the congressional process, I have this sort of poster of what the legislative process looks like. It's not this line. It's more like a pinball machine. It kind of starts in 2 places, bounces around in the middle, and sort of comes out at the end. So it's a lot different than it used to be. So let's go on to the new uses of procedure that are affecting legislative history now. I'm going to give you a few of these. There's obviously a lot more, but these are some of the more significant ones. There's committee markup. And committee markup has both good news and bad news. Now, committee markup, as you know, is like where a committee receives the bill and they go through it line by line and they debate it and amend it and so forth and so on. And it used to be, unless you were in Washington, you didn't get access to these. But now you can. I mean, there's a lot of sources that you can get committee markup from. You go to the committee website, you can get the feed, you can go to C-SPAN, you can see it there, you can go to YouTube, not just to go to actually what the committee said no. The problem, however, we face is that committee markups are not as substantive as they used to be. It's now more common that there will not be debate in committee. If there is debate to be had, it will be had behind closed doors. And then when there's full agreement, then they come out and they talk. So a lot of that debate that we might expect and we might like from committee markups that we might use to interpret legislation is not happening. Then there's something called the House Rules Committee. Has anyone seen that quote-unquote viral video of Maryland's own Chris Van Hollen, where he's going on about that there's been this rules change that sort of denied the ability of people to bring up an amendment on the floor of the House? The House Rules Committee is sort of the rules maker of the House of Representatives, and their role is entirely procedural. However, now they're also generating a lot of substance as well. And how they do that, how the House Rules Committee works is they will say, okay, we're pulling HR 3590, we're going to put that on the House floor, and we're going to make a rules resolution and a report that will say how that bill will be debated. Now that bill can have like what's called an open rule, which is sort of like open for debate and amendments and so forth. They can have a closed rule, which basically forbids all that. They just sort of go up and down or something in between. And the House Rules Committee is not allowed to amend the bills that it generates out. However, what it does is it'll send out a House Rules resolution, and then in the report it will say, this, if you adopt the House Rules resolution, you are also adopting this. So there's all this language there, all this substance, which is in a House Rules Committee report. And a lot of bills you'll see, like, they'll come to the floor one way and they leave in a different way. And you'll be like, where the hell did that come from? And that's where it's happening, all in the House Rules Committee in the reports. Not many people know that. I don't think we even see those in newsstand. And they're sort of attached to reports on Thomas and so forth, but they're kind of like resolutions. And what are resolutions? Usually they're to tell us the sense of the Senate and the Congress, not the substantive like we see them actually here.
So do you find them listed under resolutions, or where would you find them?
You'll find them, they are listed as House resolutions. So if you want a Thomas, for example, or a Corpus Congressional, you would see H-Res such and such. But, I think one of the things that people don't think about it is, like, for example, if you go to gov.us, they'll just say, oh, it's a procedural motion, it's not important, or it's not as important. But in fact, that's where a lot of the substance is actually taking place. Then, and if you have any questions, just speak up, that's fine. I'd love you to Then there's something called amendment between the houses, which is kind of fun. And how usually do, or how do you think usually, do the House and Senate resolve their differences? What do they do? Exactly, they go to conference committee.
I said armed conflict, I'm sorry.
Okay. Hey, good listen. Well, I read a sort of an interesting comment, and it said, when I was doing research for it, and it was basically, don't expect a conference committee on substantive bills ever. That's not the way they resolve conference. How they resolve, discrepancies as they use, well, let me back up. They don't resolve their discrepancies in that way anymore, at least not as much as they used to. I mean, they will do it if they have to do something very quickly, and they will probably see a conference committee happen very fast to resolve the step, possibly. But now what they do is something called amendment between the houses. And it's also something called ping pong. What they'll do is they will, say the House passes the bill, they'll send it to the Senate. The Senate will strike the text that the House sent them, insert their own, and then send it back. And then the bill kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. Most of the times it's fairly easy to follow because, they're basically taking the same bill and going back and forth. But a lot of times they'll pick up a completely different bill and sort of put the text in. And then you're sort of taking the history of one bill and merging it with another bill. In some cases they're not even related. And of course the big problem is we don't get a conference report. Someone comes to you and says, oh, I want a conference report for the healthcare bill. Well, it's not there. No, it doesn't exist. And it may not exist for a lot of substantive bills. And I guess you all know what that means. It's like, oh crap, how do we figure out legislative intent? Sheesh. Well, we have to look for it elsewhere. And then there's something called reconciliation. Reconciliation basically covers, does anyone know what reconciliation is? Maybe someone thinks it's like a deal. What is it?
So the House and, the House and the Senate pass two different bills.
Right.
You have to reconcile them.
Well, you're right, sort of. I mean, you're right. That is kind of it.
Evaluate them independently.
But it's actually, that's close, but it's actually kind of something different. That's one of the things you have to play history. You pull out these concepts and it means something completely different than what you would expect it to be. Reconciliation is sort of an optional budgetary procedure that controls that wonderful pot of money called discretionary spending. And discretionary spending is basically the money that the government is obligated to spend no matter what. I mean, we have the annual appropriations to EPA, the Park Service, and blah, blah, blah. And then we have entitlements. We have to spend no matter what. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all that kind of fun stuff. The interest also to the sizable debt. You don't control that through the annual appropriations process. You have to control it through changing the law, either increasing taxes or changing the law so that not many more people or less people or fewer people are entitled to a certain program. How they control it is basically through this whole separate process. And the important thing about it is it has an expedited procedure through the Senate. Because how many votes does it take to get anything through the Senate? Yes, it's a supermajority. But because back when they created the Budget Act of 1974, was they wanted things to move quickly with the budget, so they created an expedited procedure so it only was a majority vote in the Senate. Now, it was reconciliation is only intended for deficit reduction and implementing and not implementing policy or cutting taxes. But when you create a loophole, like through the Senate, like you did, you can imagine what Congress used it for, implementing policy and cutting taxes. So it's gone from a budgetary measure to more policy measure. And we'll see how that plays out as well. The important thing about that is it creates this whole other process for passing legislation that we graft on to the one that's kind of changed already. Okay, so let's get to healthcare, how everything plays out in the real world. And for that, I'm going to have to use props, because I can't really explain it without props. And of course, I'll be eating these later, so I'll get my hands all over them, and that way I know they're mine. I need my kids to know. Okay, so, it's interesting how short historical memory is, because I remember I had a poster when I was getting into Drexel with the whole healthcare, how it played out, and lines, diagrams, and stuff like that. And it was early, I think it was March, and this kid comes up to me and says, wow, it's really interesting. So when did all this stuff happen? And I was like, yeah, 2009, 2010, were you there? And yes, no. And that's the thing, I mean, you know, historical memory is so short now, but, you know, it's up to us as law librarians to, put all that information out there. So what happens in 2000, we had the election in 2008, Barack Obama is elected. He comes in, healthcare is a big priority, and so he approaches creating a healthcare program in a very legislative manner. Because what was he before he was president? He was
Senator.
yes, he was a senator with the legislature. He was in the legislature, he's a legislator. So he says, Congress, give me a healthcare bill, give me a healthcare program. And so he sends out directions to the House, Senate, and the House takes the lead. But normally, we would expect the House introduces a bill, it goes to committee. In this case, it didn't work out that way. What happened was sort of the House committee's jurisdiction, and I'm not going to go through them all. I may sort of refer to them, but Education and Labor, Ways and Means, Energy and Commerce sort of got together and figured out a bill. And then they introduced that bill. And then what they did, let's say this is the House bill that went to the 3 committees. They divided it up against, this is going to be hard, 3 committees. So each committee worked on the bill, and we had 3 bills from that. We had 1 bill to 3. You can see already we're sort of diverting from our model of legislative history. Not working on 1 bill, we're working on 3. So it goes to committee, and what should happen is it all comes back together. We have committee markup, and mostly committee markup works out just fine. But in one committee, Energy and Commerce, what happens is the Blue Dogs, conservative Democrats, raise a revolt, and what they do is they say it's too expensive, it's too expensive. And at that moment, we as librarians should be very excited, especially if we look at a very historical record, because that's debate, that's conflict. And yes, maybe they're fighting out fisticuffs and stuff like that, but no, they're talking about what the bill is, and this is stuff we can use to interpret legislative history, but that's not what happens, because what happens is the chairman of the committee shuts down the committee for 3 days. They go meet in Nancy Pelosi's office, and they work everything out. When they come back, we've missed everything. It's all happened behind the scenes. We don't get that full committee markup. It's fantastic. So, and that's pretty much the way it plays in the House, and that's markup for you. But at the end, we get 3 different bills, from 3 different committees. Again, not just one. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Let's see. Actually, let's stick with the House. I'm going to mix things up. So what happens is they have 3 different parts, and they have to all put them back together. And that's what they do. It goes from being 1 bill, HR 3200, as reported from 3 different committees, and it's all put back together, or I like to say blended all back together from the different committees into a different bill, HR 3962. 4 bills so far. 3 pieces, 4. I mean, the math alone, I'm just thinking. I work with my son in math. I mean, proportions, yep. Anyway, how do they bring it all together, and how do they move it to the floor? Because theoretically, what should happen when they have a bill, it should send it back to committee. Well, the House Rules Committee kind of takes over, and it says, okay, we're reporting this blended bill to the floor. But they're not only doing that. Nancy Pelosi is what's called a great transactional leader. And as a transactional leader, she's going to people who may not be into healthcare and saying, what will it take to get your vote? And she's going behind the scenes, she's getting that material together, all that stuff that turns out to be legislative material, amendments to the bill. Where does that all go? It goes into a House Rules Committee report. That's part of the resolution that reports this to the floor. And it's not part of the record as being normally expected to see. So that goes to the floor, they vote upon that, House passes healthcare. In the Senate, it's a little bit easier. They're passing bills as well. And it goes to 2 committees, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, or Health and Finance. And they put together, and actually start out with 2 separate bills. Health is pretty easy, but the big problem I had, especially with working at the law library of Congress, is in the Senate, where are bills supposed to be generated? You're supposed to, on the floor, you say, here, I have this bill, and then it goes into the record. you know, and we were at the Library of Congress, you can imagine this is a wonderful thing to get calls from all across this country. Well, the Health Committee has just introduced a bill, the Finance Committee has just introduced a bill. Where is it? Well, what would you do if you wanted to find a bill? Where would you go?
Call the committee.
What's that?
Call the committee.
You could call the committee, but you know, those people are, they're not gonna pick up the phone, I can tell you that. I tried, they don't pick up the phone anyway. If you didn't have to go to committee, where else would you go?
Congressional record.
No, let's go with the top.
No,
Come on, even faster than that, you know? Yes, you would go to Thomas. Coffee, cookies, they're definitely eating now. Anyway, all right, you can call Thomas, and that's what you expect. However, you know, they weren't introduced in the traditional way. They were introduced from the committee itself, and as such, they're committee documents. They're not really GPO documents yet, so they're not appearing in Thomas. Yeah, so you can imagine the great conversation you're having. I can't find the finance bill. It's not in Thomas. Wait, you work at the Library of Congress. You know what this bill is? My tax rate, blah, blah, blah. You know, oh, crap. Well, you won't. Well, actually, you're right. You'll find them in the committee. You would find them at the committee websites. And so, if you have a bill that's going through and it's been, especially through the Senate, it's possible it may be introduced committee, and that's going to be the place where you would go. Also, committees are generating different bills. Those versions don't find their way to Thomas. They don't find their way. I think they may find their way to Purpose Professional, but I'm not sure. If you want to find them, you have to go to the websites themselves to locate them.
Well, how do you know what committee it is? You have no information, you just have to.
Well, yeah, that's a part of the problem. Yeah. I mean, in this sense, I mean, yeah, but that's part of the problem. I mean, you are have to rely on contextual sources at that point because you wouldn't know. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's a great question. You absolutely wouldn't know. And the only reason you know is because, you know, the Health Committee and Finance Committee have reported to the Washington Post are taking the health care, and they're supposed to generate bills, and that's the only way to find out. Because you're not going to find it. Yeah, it's not in the original course. You're not going to find it that way. Ah, that's great stuff. Okay, so health and finance sort of come together, and they've got two separate bills. And what happens is they've got to be joined together too. They've got to come together as well. Blend. Okay. And the big, the big cloud in the Senate, what do you have to do to pass anything? Is what? 60 votes. Right? 60 votes for closure. You need 60 votes to move to a measure and 60 votes to close debate. So, Harry Reid, of course, majority leader of the Senate, he is taking those two bills, putting them together into a separate bill. Now, to do that, he does something rather interesting. He has to get a vehicle to send his stuff back to the House. And the bill he chooses to do that is H.R. 3590, the Service Members Homeownership Tax Act. And they take that, strike the language, and put their language in. Now, I mean, they had a House health care bill they could have moved to. Why did they pick tax credits for service members as the vehicle to pass health care? Yes. Yes.
Senate cannot originate revenue provisions.
Was that?
Senate cannot originate revenue provisions.
Yes, that's actually a very good answer. You're absolutely right. There's actually two reasons they did it. One is, yeah, they cannot, the Senate itself cannot introduce revenue measures on the Constitution. It has to be done through the House. So whatever's going to be passed has to be a House bill. There's a second element to that, and I called some, at the time, a lot of people thought there was something, you know, scary. There was a Congress was up to some, you know, foolishness, like trying to maybe sneak healthcare through, like attached to tax credits for service members, because who would vote against that? But you know, at the same time, I mean, come on, I mean, they're not going to trick anybody by doing that. But the other reason is that actually that separate act had already passed, and you can't find that. I've tried it. You can't find it on Thomas. You can't find it anywhere else. There are all these bills dealing with tax credits for service members, but on the record, at least on Thomas, you can't find out whether they passed or not. And what happened was it had actually been incorporated as an amendment to another bill. So that bill is just lying around not doing anything, and Harry Reid picks it up, and that's what he puts healthcare into it. Because again, he needs a revenue measure to move through. But that shows the problem that we're having with this new kind of legislative stuff. You know, I had people try to find the Service Members Tax Credit Act as it was incorporated in the bill. They cannot find it on Thomas. They kind of have to take the language out, do a search, and then they kind of find it through the back door. It's really hard to find. Okay, so we get a blended bill, but again, Harry Reid has to get all 60 votes together to do that, to pass this bill. And what do you do? He's a good transactional leader too. So he goes to individual members, find out what they need to pass the bill. And to some degree, it's kind of funny because the deals they make get all these great names, like I guess he goes to the senator, Cornhuskers. Who are the Cornhuskers? Nebraska, right? Midwestern. They have like the Cornhusker kickback because Nebraska gets this, and Louisiana Purchase because the Senator from Louisiana gets that, and Republicans have a great fun doing that. But Harry Reid is working on all this stuff, putting all these amendments together. Where is he doing it? Is he doing it on the floor? No, he's doing it behind the scenes. So all this kind of stuff, this debate, this discussion that we would want for legislative history to interpret something, is not there. What we do get on the Senate floor are lots and lots and lots of amendments. I think we get if you look on Thomas, you can see 506 amendments. Well, you would think, wow, that's great. I mean, at least you have a lot of amendment activity going on. But of those 506 amendments, only 18 are actually relevant. And that's because what the Senate does is they don't have a rules committee. What they do is they have these unanimous consent agreements, which kind of structures how the floor debate's going to work. And under those agreements, only certain amendments are going to be debated and voted upon. Most of those other ones, especially the AC and Thomas, are completely irrelevant. They're just being, yes.
So those 500, those deals that Harry Reid had to pull off,
right.
Those were the amendments?
No, those aren't those. Those aren't there.
Those aren't the 500.
506 is just people saying, it's like Bernie Sanders, he introduces a health care plan of his own, that one of the Republican senators forced to be read on the floor. He knew it wasn't going to pass, but he wanted to put this out. But no, they're just completely irrelevant to it. I mean, it's just like to make stand points and stuff like that, because they're kind of like out of order. Under the uniform consent agreements, only certain amendments are being allowed. All these other ones are just being offered for window dressing. So you look at it and you think these amendments are important, but in reality, you don't have to look at anything except for 18. Now, all that stuff that Harry Reid is picking up goes into what's called a manager's amendment. And that actually goes into the bill. So, when he's filing for cloture for voting for the Senate bill, I think they have to vote on the manager's amendment, and then they have to vote on the amendment to HR 3590, and then they have to vote for HR 3590 as a whole. And it was really fun being at the Law Library of Congress because you have to be there when they're debating it. I think it was going late at night, so you're there at like 2 o'clock in the morning, they're voting on all this stuff. I think there was a snowstorm coming at the time. It was like that. Man, it was okay, so we finally get a Senate bill, House bill and Senate bill. And now what do we have to do? God, this is going to be messy. Yeah. You thought the healthcare got done was messy. I mean, that's going to be real messy. Should have happened. Should have gotten it. Okay. All right. So basically, we have 2 different bills. And what do we do again? What do we do if we have a disagreement between House and Senate? We have exactly. We did a conference, and they were going to try to do that, but they weren't going to have a real conference committee because it was too hard to sort of get everything together. So it was going to be a faux conference committee, but something happened. Does anyone have to guess what happened that sort of derailed the entire healthcare thing? Anyone from Massachusetts? What's that? Yes, he did die. What happened after that? Yes, they elected Scott Brown. So Reid has 60 votes up to that. The great people of Massachusetts like Scott Brown, it basically takes away that 60th vote. So healthcare is not going to pass unless something different happens. And that different thing is reconciliation. So as messed up as things are, we have to make them even more complicated. And how that works, we have to go back in time. I need a heart. Back in time. Back to 2009. The Democrats had sort of thought, like, let's use reconciliation to pass health care. Republicans had done it to push tax cuts and stuff like that. Let's do it for health care. But the feeling was at the time, yeah, we could sort of strong arm this through, but we want to kind of have, Republican ownership of it, because as you can see now, there's sort of like one party's for it, one party's against it. The hope was that they could get Republicans on board. It was bipartisan. It would be harder to get rid of, God forbid, the Democrats lose the Senate. So they decided, okay, we're not going to do reconciliation. Republicans against that. Hopefully we did for bipartisan effort. However, they did lay the groundwork for reconciliation to happen. How they did that was they sent out reconciliation instructions to the committees. And the reconciliation instructions to the committees say find savings of a certain amount. And committees look at that and they say, okay, we're going to find savings. And they not only sent reconciliation for healthcare, they also did it for student loans. That's also good. So that was all done in the spring of 2009. As it gets later, and we have the big kerfuffles with the Tea Party and so forth in the summer, everything like that. It gets to October, and then the House committees of jurisdiction, 2 of them send reconciliations instructions to the House Budget Committee. This is all part of how reconciliation works. And what they did is they sent the healthcare bills that they generated earlier, these 2 pieces of cookies. Another one was like that. No reason. I think they were probably just lazy. So the House Budget Committee gets them, and it also gets, let's say, student loans, and all bundles them together in another bill, which has a report. And actually, this report is really important because this is the last report of this whole cycle. And even if we don't get the conference committee report, the last report is generally considered, of substantive value. I mean, it's like says what Congress meant. And all right, let's have a show of hands. Who still uses UScan? Okay. All right. Well, and that's what UScan does. I mean, they look at the last report, and that's generated. And actually, not only them, but if you go to the end of if you go to section large at the end of the bill, you'll see this report is the last report generated. And under traditional legislative history, you should rely upon it. However, it's completely wrong. It's screwed up. It's screwed up big, and they haven't. I mean, the funny thing is that. The reason why they screwed up big is because the House Budget Committee doesn't do anything to the bill. They just bundle it all together. And this is only one phase. It hasn't ended yet. It's still going. And that bill is irrelevant to what eventually passed. And if you go to your physical volume of UScan, it has that report in it, and it's completely irrelevant to it. They changed it, I think, on the electronic product, but they haven't done it in the books. And this is one of the problems with legislative history as we do now. Sometimes, and this is even true of CIS, that you're probably going to get the most accurate information online than you are in the books. Because the process is so complicated. Even on Thomas or Comstock, whatever we call back now, you have like one person over at the Congressional Research Service who's like, oh crap, we got to make these connections here and here and here. And then they'll change everything to reflect what actually happened once they figure it out. When you figure it, CRS can't even figure out what's going on. It's unbelievable. So, needless to say, I think somebody said that it was probably negligence to rely on UScan. And I think we have to, at this point, send UScan off to that area, the netherworld of resources that we use, like shepherds falling for reporters and stuff like that. And just say goodbye. You've served your purpose, unless Westlaw does something to change it. Okay, so what happened? We have reconciliation. What happened is we get this bizarre dance where basically you have a House bill, the Senate doesn't like the Senate bill, but the House doesn't like. Basically, you use the Rules Committee again to take the bill that was passed in the Senate, pass that in the House, send it on to the President. We get that bill passed. Reconciliation is a little bit more different. The House takes that. Again, there are changes in the House Rules Committee, to change the bill based on what Nancy Pelosi can get from her members. That's all put in the House Rules Committee report. That is attached to a new reconciliation bill. It strikes that language that they got, it puts in new language, and that goes to the House floor. And then it goes up to the Senate. And the Senate can't change it, they're not going to change it because it's agreed with the House. And then it turns out, the Senate passes it, but then it turns out there's a procedural problem, it goes back to the House, and then I think the House passes it, or it goes back to the Senate. And then it finally gets to the President's desk. And then, God, we get help here after all that. And as you can imagine, that's not legislative history as we know it, or as we taught it, or as we certainly experienced it. It's a lot different now. If you follow healthcare, you can miss reconciliation. If you follow healthcare, you can also miss the Senate bill that was invented. If you're looking up like a phrase, what they meant by biosimilars, you miss the Senate bill. And then amendment between the houses. How did it start off as the homeowners tax credit act? If you're following legislative history back, you can easily make that U-turn onto that shell bill and follow the history of that, even though it's completely irrelevant. I didn't actually use it. And I would love to say that this is just an aberration, but this is how they pass it now. It's just the way. Why? Any number of reasons that we can put up. Partisanship, the campaign cycle. I'm sure we can blame social media. I mean, any number of reasons. But they just use these procedures in different ways, in the same ways, but they just use them to get to the final goal, which is passing this on. And it's really something we have to be aware about. Because we don't want to look bad. We want to give people the information that they need. Does that mean we have to give up the traditional model? I think the traditional model is important for teaching. I mean, as hard as it is, I love legislative history, I know you all love it, but I guess a lot of law students or lawyers or something like that, I guess they just kind of glaze over if you start talking about amendment in the houses. So I think we can still use the schoolhouse rock model. But we, as law librarians, have to be aware of these changes, especially when we're doing legislative history. Because we don't look bad. You want to end up researching something that we don't have to. So what do we have to know? We have to know the context more, like you were saying. We have to hit the Washington Post, we have to hit the New York Times, the newspaper records. They do a lot of reporting on procedure. I think the Washington Post admits that they spent half their reporting on procedure alone on the healthcare reform. And the big fights now, what are they about? They're basically procedure. So procedure counts. And of course, your congressional reporting almanac. Those big green volumes. Does anyone still have those? Do you guys have them? Do you have congressional reporting? Yeah, neat. Okay. There's a big green volume, just kind of like a summary of congressional activity. You can find that they're crucial to understanding what happened. The congressional report does a great job of putting all that kind of stuff together. So if you, I think a lot of undergraduate libraries have them. University of Baltimore. Does the University of Baltimore have them? University of Baltimore.
Law doesn't, I don't know.
Okay.
Lansdowne.
Find out if they do, because those are really crucial finding out what goes on. And then of course there are your online sources, but of course, as you know, be careful with those. Roll call, Politico, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes there's good reporting, other times they just 24 hours putting stuff together. We also have to know the rules. And there's a lot of information out there to tell you how the rules work. The Congressional Research Service does a great job of putting together pamphlets and documents to tell Congress how to do its business. They're not supposed to be public, but they eventually find their way into public through different sources like OpenCRS, WikiLeaks, and so forth and so on. They're very helpful. There's the House and Senate rules. These can change, but they're available on census.gov. And there's something called House and Senate precedents. The House and Senate are a presidential body. So what they will do is they will publish these huge volumes of how they have acted in the past, sort of give you a way of understanding of what they do. And it's also not important in the sense of, healthcare and stuff like that. Have any of you guys dealt with the question with whether or not this Federal Reserve is a legitimate body, or Federal Reserve is legal? The big fight about that. It seems like I've missed the public sector, because we get these great questions about, whether or not the 16th Amendment should pass and stuff like that. But the big thing with legitimacy of the Federal Reserve is that, a lot of senators weren't there when they were passing the Federal Reserve. And it looks like, if you look at the tally, who wasn't there, you're kind of like, well, yeah, actually, it looks like they might have stuck it through at Christmas when people were gone. And, the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, totally just a snow job. But if you actually look at the record, there's something called pairing. And what they do is like, it's an old procedure and it's in the precedents, in this material we're talking about. And what it is they basically, if you don't want to be there, as in the Senate when they're voting on something, you find somebody that's voting against the position you're taking, and you say, here, I want you to vote this way, and you vote that way, so we cancel each other out. And if you tally those votes together with pairing, it actually is like, actually did have a majority. It's not that no one was speaking on anything. Senators just really wanted to get home, and that's what they did. to do it. So it can help us understand a lot of legislation, a lot of legislative activity, not even now, but also in the past as well. And see, this is great. I mean, you can't just Google this stuff. You can't just put it into your Go bar. What do they call it in West London? Is it Go bar? Or is that Bloomberg? I don't know. You just can't put it into your Go bar and just have all this stuff pop up because it's so complicated and you can't understand it. It just doesn't, just leap out at you. You actually have to read books, which is what we're supposed to be for. There are also some great books. And I think if there's one book that you have to have on congressional procedure, it should be Walter Olechek's Congressional Procedures and the Policy Process. I think the new edition is coming out. If you do not have it, I insist that you do have it if you do any legislative history because it explains stuff. I'm sorry. Actually, if you wanted me to send your presentation, I will do it. It's Walter Olechek. I'll spell his last name. It's O-L-E-S-Z, as in zoo, E-K. And it's Congressional Procedures and the Policy Process. 9th edition, 2013. It's very readable. It's a very, very, very good book. It's even fun to read, surprisingly enough. So, but if you're going to be doing any legislative history, you must have that book. Another important book that's kind of republished fairly frequently is called Unorthodox Lawmaking, and that's by Barbara Sinclair, S-I-N-C-L-A-I-R. Finally, University of Baltimore people, you have Charles Tiefer. Is Charles Tiefer still there? Mm-hmm. He wrote a great book called Congressional Practice and Procedure, which unfortunately is no longer in print, but it talks about all these great procedures in detail, and it can help you understand them. That was last published in 1989. I think we got our copy from eBay or something like that, so always good to have it on hand. So that is it. Do you have any questions?
What's your prediction for what's happening now?
I'm terrible about making predictions because I was thought for sure like the healthcare bill was going to get overturned by the Supreme Court. So, I think I told my wife that everything was going to get worked out, a few days ago. So I'm going to not make predictions. However, I will say something that's interesting. We were talking about before between amendments between houses, and actually this is a little bit scary. With the way they showed the vehicle for the healthcare bill, I think that's one of the last ditch challenges to healthcare is that, the revenue measures should have been introduced in the House, not the Senate where they were. And I met this guy, and he said that Justice Roberts was doing this great sort of old-fashioned trick, because he said that the healthcare bill is like, this personal requirement is a tax. And if it's a tax, and they didn't generate it in the House, but they revisit it, what are they going to do with it? And I'm not going to make any predictions about that, because I don't want to mess anything up. But that's an interesting question to discuss now. But other than that, I'm not going to make any other predictions, because I know they're wrong. Any other questions? Yes?
Those House Rules reports you referenced a couple times.
Right.
Will they, if you're lazy like I am, you just rely on Northwest Congressional, tell you what's relevant to you? Are they going to show up in that kind of listing, or do you have to?
They should show up. They should show up. But but the thing is, you have to be aware of the role that they play.
Okay.
And I think that's the thing is they the thing with ProQuest Congressional, and then my big beef with it is they give you so much. You get all this great stuff, but of course you have to comb through and find out what's what and what's. They don't wait for you what's the most important stuff. They just throw all this stuff at you. And so you have to be aware that they're there. And that may be where something entered into the stream that otherwise didn't. But yes, they will be there. They will be on Thomas or Congress.gov, and they will be on the other places.
Okay.
They do list them with it. But I don't think that if you go to the House, you would also think that the material you're looking for would be in the House Rules resolution itself, because hey, it's a resolution, it's a bill, blah, blah. But it's actually the report. The text you're looking for is actually the report. So, okay. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
So you're sort of just more. So you're sort of confirming with me that a lot of times things really doesn't show up, but if they happen to be before us, it's whatever. I just feel like I'm terrible researcher. I can't find something out of it.
Right.
So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's possible that it could not be there. I think you have to sort of throw yourself up to the possibility that that's totally the case. But also the situation is so murky, and it may be there, we just don't know where it happens to be. I mean, it was funny because a friend of mine, I guess the House was trying to pass a natural resources bill or an energy bill, and there's a provision on ANWR, the actual Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and it kind of disappeared from the bill because, you know, for whatever, and somebody thought, well, you're trying to sneak it through. Maybe the Republicans have had, you know, a change of heart, they don't want to go there anymore. But what was happening is that they were sort of segmenting what Speaker Boehner was trying to do. He was trying to pass parts separately, you know, and then sort of have everything merged together at the end. You know, so basically it's one of those situations in the House Rules Committee where you have like this one stream that's being fragmented and then sort of being brought together. Yeah, right. So you have to be aware of that to know exactly what's happening. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, especially with the market, it just may not exist at all. Yeah.
That was my question about the progressive congressional. If they are actually putting those things in the.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely they are. But again, progressive congressional, I mean, you just sort of have to check back and make sure that they have everything. Sometimes, I mean, I think when I was looking at CIS, which, you know, formerly Lexus CIS, whatever, you know, there was some stuff that wasn't there. But again, they don't give you, I mean, they won't tell you if there's substance in it. You have to find it out yourself. Okay.
Thank you very much for speaking. I also want to remind people that November 6th, we're having a program in Annapolis, and it's going to be Judge Irma Raker. She was the second woman on the Court of Appeals, and she is speaking. She's outgoing chair of the Maryland jury instructions and civil and criminal, and she's going to speak on that and also her tenure on the court. So that should be fascinating. It's going to be in Annapolis at the Anne Arundel Library. We're also working on the Christmas party, which may be at Miles and Stockbridge in December. So immediately following this meeting, we're going to have a meeting of the committee, the people interested in working on the Legal Research Institute. So thank you very much for reading.